Welcome, Dr. Lewis, to the Root of Our Health. It is such a pleasure to have you here. Thank you so much for taking your time out of your busy day, I'm sure, to be here on this show.
Thank you for having me. It's my pleasure.
Great, great. So let's just dig in. Excuse me. I was doing a lot of research for this episode, and I watched some of your TED talks. I looked on your website, and all of it just shows a lot of passion in not only what you do, but also the product that you have. And of course, I'm going to link the TEDx talk, and we're going to talk about the product in just a moment. But where did this passion come from? So if you can give us a little bit of your background, that'd be a great start for this.
Sure, I'd be happy to. I've been someone who's interested in physical activity and sports pretty much my entire life. I started out playing baseball when I could barely even put a sentence together, but my grandfather pitched baseball to me in the backyard, and then it went from there. And I got into drug-free competitive bodybuilding in college. So I've always been very active, and I think simultaneously I've also been a very passionate and committed person to whatever it is that I'm doing at whatever phase in my life. And so for me, ultimately, I ended up getting out of the competitive part of my life. I transitioned out of that when I realized I couldn't make a living in bodybuilding unless I really wanted to go down the drug route, taking drugs and just completely living that life. I thought I was a little better than that. With all due respect to the bodybuilders out there, I thought I had more of a brain and more of a mind to do other things with that part of myself rather than just the rest of my body. So I really transitioned more from a performance orientation to a health and wellness orientation. And as I was getting into bodybuilding, I started looking into nutrition much more thoroughly as well, as opposed to just taking for granted what somebody in a magazine was saying. I started looking into nutrition really more for myself, in terms of more of a scientific perspective than say just your typical mass media perspective. And that definitely changed me too, to the point where I changed from being a native Southerner eating really much more for taste and health. I ended up completely leaving all that behind, and this is my now 26th year of eating a plant-based diet, where most people from the South, well, most Americans in general eat a lot of meat, a lot of animal products. I left all that behind 26 years ago, and so anything that you see, in like my TED talk or any of the other things that you may see online, or even if at some point you ever have a chance to come to a lecture or something where I'm speaking, I think for me, one thing that I always want to leave people with is that, hey, that guy's committed to what he does and what he believes. It's one thing to do things and do a good job and do it the right way or the ethical way, but when you can take it to another level, which again comes from the heart as opposed to just from the mind, I think that you can really demonstrate to people that you are who you say you are. And for me, in the health and wellness, I say that broadly speaking. Obviously that's a big umbrella term, but within health and wellness, I think it's very important for all of us to not be hypocrites. And if you saw me on stage and I weighed 350 pounds, I looked like I couldn't walk across the stage without keeling over from a heart attack or a stroke, you'd think I was a fraud. You'd think I was a joke. And regardless of how much I knew, no one would take me seriously because they would look at me and say, well, that guy's is not even close to the model of health. And so for me, it's very important to anything that I say or do or recommend, it's what I do for myself or my family or my close friends. And so that's just for me, the pinnacle of, being in this industry is that you have to look the way you say that you believe, or the things that you believe in or espouse to other people. So I think that's really where that passion comes from. And I was a very passionate researcher for a couple of decades. I left academics about it's about 6.5 years ago now, to go into business based on some of the research that I had conducted, what I thought was the most important and significant and meaningful research. I really kind of got burned out on the whole academic process of basically begging the government, foundations, even individuals for money to do research. It's really a very challenging and, quite frankly, exhausting way to make a living and to live your life. It's really, really, I mean, talk about being committed. You have to be 100% and then some committed to being an academic researcher. And same is true as being, a businessman or an entrepreneur, trying to build a brand from basically the ground floor and doing it the right way. I know that a lot of times in the dietary supplement industry, people, look at supplements as being either snake oil or suspicious or, oh, well, that's just a company that's got great marketing, but their product is junk or bogus. And so for me, I just transitioned from being a scientist to a marketer that stands on his science, but it's still the same person. So I still put my name behind everything. It's still about who I am and what I believe in, and based on the research that we conducted and the articles that we published after our research. So I'm still me. I didn't just become, well, now I'm all about the money, and now I'm going into business to be whatever. It's still me. It's still the same person. It just I shifted gears, and even though I'm still actually publishing a little bit here and there, it's not one of my primary priorities anymore. But certainly, I still want to have a science-based business that people can say, yeah, that guy Lewis is doing it the right way. He's putting his money where his mouth is in terms of science and backing it up with good science. And so for me, that's very important too. So, being the opposite of a hypocrite and having a science base and being passionate about what I believe in and being committed and really just, walking as I talk, like living it, not just talking about it and then doing something else, but actually living it. All those principles to me are very important and really just speak to who I am and who I've been pretty much my entire life.
Yeah, and I got that from the get-go, like walking the walk, as you said, right? But you go all the way back to your bodybuilding days. That takes determination in itself. So that is a dedication and a determination and to getting your, if people don't realize this, but when you start that and when you really get into that and really, again, it's a process, it's a long process. So knowing that can definitely carry you into other factors in your life, other things, nutrition, research, all of this, and just knowing that our bodies are a whole. It's not just structure or working out, it's not just eating or nutrition, and it's not just our cognitive or the mental health. It's we're a whole being. So you taking the steps to indicate or to look at that as a whole is it just speaks volumes, obviously, of who you are and how you started in the beginning to where you are now. So well, let me ask, do you still do some bodybuilding at all or lifting weights at all?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, my workout routine never changed. I still strength train every day. And even though I don't compete in bodybuilding anymore, I sometimes, I have like this, I guess my narcissistic or more ego driven part of my personality says, hey, why don't you try that again?
Yeah.
But it's too demanding. I mean, I'm focused on other things. If I had all the time in the world to do other things like go back to that part of my life, maybe, but I just there are too many more things I want to do, and I think too many more people that need help. And not that there are not a lot of great role models out there already, but I think the type of work that I have done, the research that I've done in polysaccharides that I hope we'll talk about, is
Yep.
something that's very unique and novel and not many people know much about. And I think that is one of the interesting things about my life and my work is that I have a kind of a niche that is, again, pretty well unknown, but yet it's so powerful. And so for me, like if I could somehow weave a, a competition into what I do every day again, that might be something I'd consider in the future. But right now, I guess I have too many other priorities. But yeah, I mean, to me, again, exercise is number two on my list beyond or besides nutrition being number one in terms of keeping me healthy and strong and functional and just vibrant. I mean, I can't imagine not moving unless I'm sick or injured. I'm working out every day. So yeah, I never left that part of it behind. It just, it shifted from, again, a sports competitive focus to health and orientation performance. But I will make one other point about weight training, and that is I think that for many years, if you look at the history of exercise science up until probably the 80s, I mean, even if you talk about, bodybuilders like in the 50s, 60s, and the 70s, they were obviously using a lot of drugs and, had amazing bodies, but they actually learned something. I mean, even though they were using drugs, they still learned things about intensity and consistency and periodization, specificity, physiological adaptation. I mean, there were a lot of things that really were kind of taken for granted. And exercise science back in those days was much more focused on aerobic or cardiovascular training. So actually, in a way, the bodybuilders had kind of figured out some things about the body way before the scientists did. And then finally, in the 80s, 90s, and up until today, science has learned that weight training and strength training actually confer many benefits that were only once thought to only be conferred by aerobic or cardiovascular training. So, like when a woman says to me, "Oh, well, I don't want to lose my femininity or get too muscular," I'm like, man, you don't have to worry about
Yeah.
that. Like, you actually naturally produce so little testosterone that if you did turn into looking like a man, you'd be like a genetic freak, or you'd be taking steroids, or both. Like, very few women can actually naturally achieve that. However, you need to strength train to protect your bones and your muscles. Sarcopenia is such a huge problem. Osteoporosis is such a huge problem. And then that goes with, I mean, those are just, two of our organs, and all the rest get affected by weight training as well. So it's just amazing how much benefit we can get from strength training as opposed to aerobic training, and really why people should make strength training a very important part of their lives, at least a few days a week. I mean, I do it every day, but at least 2, 3, 4 days a week to get the benefits that we know that people can get from strength training or weight training. So I think it's important to recognize how far the science has come in terms of recognizing its benefit, because again, 40, 50 years ago, it really was kind of ignored, but now it's really gained its place in status and in terms of how beneficial it is for our health.
Yes, I'm right there with you, Dr. Lewis. I actually did a solo episode a few back, specifically on strength training. I believe that I do for 4 days, 4 to 5 days of really. I've started getting into heavy training a little bit, but then that's just a goal that I'm working on. But in general, as we get older, because in your 40s, 50s, and we, as you mentioned, sarcopenia, start to lose the muscle. And that's where we get the breaking of the hips and the falls and all of that, because our bones and our muscles are so weak that we can't function. We can't pick up groceries. We can't pick up our grandkids. We can't, do the things that every day that we can do. And so, yes, having that regimen, like you said, 3 to 4, like 3 days at least. And yeah, walking, running if you want, by all means, but that strength needs to be there right behind it. So thank you again for going into detail with that. And yes, the science has caught up, gratefully so. And hopefully we have everybody, including women. I tend to be the only woman in the weight area still, but I'm hoping to be that pioneer of, oh, come on, this is not the 80s where we all think that that's going to happen. But I think there's more. As a tangent, I did see a mom teaching her 14-year-old daughter strength. So that was for me. That was like a moment of, oh, thank God. We're there. We're getting there. So you mentioned well, we're talking about your product. So let's talk about it in a little bit of what it can do for you. You said polysaccharides. Actually, let's go into detail about that first. And then we can go into the full product itself. So if you want to talk a little bit about polysaccharides and how what it is and the benefits.
Well, again, as I mentioned, I think polysaccharides are, most people don't know what they are. So I could have said complex sugars. And if I said to you, guess what sugars are good for you, based on what the mass media has promoted for the last, it's almost decades now, you think every sugar is bad for you, but a sugar is not a sugar. A sugar is very dependent on two different characteristics at least. One is the source of the sugar, and the second is the molecular structure of the sugar, the bonds that go in between each of the different parts of the molecule of the compound. So just because high fructose corn syrup, for example, is really terrible for us, and I always tell people, if you see high fructose corn syrup on a label on a product you're considering buying, by all means, please put that thing back up on the shelf. However, that has nothing to do with the different types of sugars that come from Mother Nature that can be very good for us. And the two that my colleagues and I have studied for many, many years come from aloe vera and rice bran. So sugars are typically grouped into three different categories. You have monosaccharides, which are very simple sugars, like glucose. And fructose. You have disaccharides like sucrose, which are, again, kind of sweet, but a little more complex. And then finally, you have polysaccharides or oligosaccharides, which are the most complex sugars in nature. Now, those sugars are so complex, they're almost like 5D models in a sense, that they cannot even be completely characterized in biochemical terms. So they're really very, very complex and very, very dense with information. And if I may, I'll just there's a tangent onto that as well. And that is, these polysaccharides contain so much coded information to guide and direct our genes to tell our cells what to do, actually more so than what we find in amino acids and fatty acids. So these polysaccharides can be very, very important for us in terms of helping us to be healthy. And so circling all that back to let food be thy medicine that Hippocrates said way before our calendar started, anything that we put into our mouth that we eat or drink ultimately is coded information for our genes to then tell our cells what to do. So when you think about something like these polysaccharides, ace-mannan, acetylated polymannose, it's got several different synonyms, but it basically means the same thing from this particular polysaccharide that comes from aloe vera. This stuff tells our genes what to do, that tells our cells how to function properly. So it's really fascinating to be able to take these particular polysaccharides into as part of your supplement routine. Forget food. I mean, number one, I don't know anyone who eats aloe vera. And usually when you mention the word aloe vera, most people think of it as for a topical purpose anyway, right? If you have a sunburn or a cut or a wound or something. And that's fine. I mean, you can put your aloe vera gel on your skin, and of course that will help to heal it. But the gel is about 98.5, 99% water. So imagine how much of that gel you would have to consume to get just, a tiny little fraction of those polysaccharides. Now, mind you, you only need a few hundred milligrams, maybe a gram or two at most, to actually have a very significant physiological and therapeutic benefit. But nonetheless, you couldn't possibly get this from aloe vera gel. You'd just be consuming way too much water. And then it's got aloe in it, which will cause you to have diarrhea. I mean, it wouldn't be a pleasant experience, just to go into your backyard and start cutting leaves off your aloe vera plant and consuming that stuff. But what we have is a concentrated source of these polysaccharides from aloe vera that we put into, that was really, if you ask me, I mean, it's a formulation. It's not just polysaccharides. It has other things in it as well. But this formulation that we tested in our research at the University of Miami, I felt like was the most important and key characteristic or ingredient of this particular formulation, just for the fact that when you look at vitamins and minerals that come from lots of different food sources, again, these polysaccharides, this ace-mannan, really does not come from that many sources. And so to me, that's kind of like, there's no magic bullet. I mean, there's no one thing that does it. You have to have lots of different nutrients, phytonutrients, elements, vitamins, minerals, cofactors, metabolites, etc., to function properly. But when you have something that's so unique and yet so beneficial, and then you introduce it into your daily routine, that's when it's like, wow, your cells start to wake up and function the way they were designed to. So that's kind of a long-winded answer to say that polysaccharides, again, don't, as the old saying goes, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. I mean, anytime someone says a sugar, I always correct them and say, yeah, but wait a minute, you're making a very broad generalization that's not true when you say sugar is bad for you. It's a very poor use of the language. So just be cautious in saying that yes, certain processed sugars that people or companies are using as sweeteners and common ingredients today in all this packaged food. That's the kind of stuff we want to stay away from. But these polysaccharides, again, particularly from aloe vera and rice bran, can be very beneficial for us. And as far as the rice bran goes, it's interesting that, as I'm sure you know, most of the world prefers to eat white rice, not brown rice. And so when the rice is taken out of the field and transported to the mill to be milled, the rice bran is the part of the outside part of the kernel that makes it brown, that gives it color. And when that bran is stripped off, that's where those polysaccharides are. And then that seed, that white piece that's left that people commonly eat, that's basically just very simple sugar. And so the rice bran ends up getting either thrown away or fed to the livestock. So actually, the farm animals end up eating the most beneficial part of the rice that contains all of that, again, coded information within the bran. That's where rice really gives us that benefit. So if you're someone who likes to eat white rice, I would tell you, unfortunately, you're not doing yourself much good by just eating white rice. But at the same time, again, much to the analogy of aloe vera, where you can't eat all that gel and expect to get a particular therapeutic benefit. Same thing with rice bran. You'd have to eat buckets of brown rice to really get the amount of concentrated polysaccharide that you need to have a therapeutic benefit. And especially, in today's day and age where we're just riddled with all these epidemics, whether it's, still heart disease and cancer, and then of course Alzheimer's is exploding, diabetes, obesity, mood disorder. I mean, the list just goes on and on. So when you have a health challenge and it's a serious one and it's chronic, that's where your body really needs the additional nutritional support. And not to say that people that are looking to prevent those things don't need a lot of nutritional support as well. But especially when you already have an existing health challenge, that's when your cells really need that support. So that's why, sometimes I caution people, and I guess part of my belief too is that maybe 100 years ago we could get everything that we needed to function well and be optimally healthy through our food. Today, however, forget it. We've got all this pollution in the environment, whether it's our water, our air, our soil. We have the genetic modification factor of food. We have all these herbicides, pesticides that get dumped into the agriculture process. And all that stuff, unfortunately for us, contributes to our food being less nutritious than it was prior to all these chemicals being introduced and all this genetic modification and everything else going on. And that doesn't count electromagnetic radiation. I mean, there are just a whole host of things that are damaging our food today. So that's why I tell people I truly believe you can be very healthy with food, but I don't know if you can be completely optimally healthy without adding some key dietary supplements to it.
Yes, completely agree. Yes, thank you for going into detail about exactly what polysaccharides are, and also the components going into your the supplement. Um, you're absolutely right. Sugar is not all equal. You have to have it's really the added sugars that are like the evil, right? But the natural sugars, the things that we are growing, like the aloe vera. I do know that there is aloe vera water. I don't know if people really drink it, but I do know that it is out there. Yeah, but yes, to your what you've said, that you have to drink it or eat it so much in order to get the benefits out of it. So let's talk a little bit about in detail the daily brain care. So is it just the polysaccharides in it? What else is in it? I don't know if you mentioned that in what you talked about. What is in it, and how? And you mentioned people that have like the chronic issues. So should we start like preventive first, or and the chronic issuers? Or talk to me a little bit about the supplement itself.
Well, daily brain care is based on. So I started down this line or down this journey or down this path of polysaccharide research almost 20 years ago. That's hard to believe. But daily brain care is based on the research primarily that we did. We ran 2 clinical trials in people with Alzheimer's and multiple sclerosis. If you want me to share with the listeners just a little bit about the results of the research first, I can
Yes.
do that.
Yes,
And then
please do.
okay, and then after that, I'll tell you why we created daily brain care and even the name and a little bit more about the formulation itself. But this particular formulation, again, it was a very different approach or strategy from what Big Pharma does with one chemical for one symptom or one disease based on one mechanism of action. This is a totally different approach. And I also like to be very clear that we never talk about using nutrition to treat, manage, mitigate, or prevent disease. This is way more powerful than that. Nutrition actually provides the body the raw materials that it needs to function properly, all the way down to every single cell, all 30 plus trillion cells. And so that's a way more powerful paradigm than what Big Pharma does. And so we didn't try to find a magic bullet. I mentioned, this one thing that we always want to, oh, John, what's that one thing to do? Like
Yeah.
everybody wants to know that one thing. What is that one thing? Just tell me that one thing I need to do. I'm like, there's no such
There's no such thing.
biology, physiology, biochemistry. We don't work that way. We need lots of things. So we designed this formulation knowing that of the 3 most significant neurodegenerative disorders, we got money to study 2 of them, Alzheimer's and MS. Unfortunately, we didn't have the funding to do Parkinson's, but I'm working with some individuals with Parkinson's that are having very nice benefit. But nonetheless, we ran these 2 clinical trials. We put them on the formulation for 12 months. I'll talk about Alzheimer's first because for me, that's the one that's the most significant and really what caused me to end up leaving academics because of the discoveries we made. But these were people with moderate to severe disease. So these are the people that, once again, Big Pharma cares nothing about. Big Pharma is interested in people with either newly diagnosed dementia or mild cognitive impairment. They don't want the really impaired people. They look at those people as being beyond help. But we felt like for us, we were trying to help people. Again, this wasn't just purely to run a study. We were truly hoping to help people. And so these were people with moderate to severe disease, on average age 79.9 years of age, very old folks. And oh, by the way, they didn't just have Alzheimer's, they had mood disorder, mostly depression. They had diabetes, heart disease. I don't think anyone had cancer, but these were very sick folks that had lots of issues. We started them out on the formulation. We had enough funding to do, we drew blood at baseline in 12 months. Unfortunately, we couldn't draw the blood at 3, 6, and 9 months, but we did do the neuropsych cognitive testing at baseline 3, 6, 9, and 12 months. Now, that first paper that we published from that study was all the way back in 2013. It's hard to believe it's not going on over 10 years ago. But I kid you not, Elizabeth, and don't take my word for it. Go to PubMed, do your own research, and say Lewis is full of crap, or yeah, he's exactly right. But there has been either nothing published before or nothing in the 10 years since published showing what we showed, and that was clinically and statistically significant improvement in cognitive function. Elizabeth, that's unheard of.
Nice.
I mean,
yeah.
And I had, and during and by the way, during the trial, as the study was going, I would occasionally get caregivers calling me in tears of joy, saying their loved one, whether it was a spouse, a parent, a grandparent, whatever the relationship was, calling me. I mean, I always, every time I tell this, I start getting chill bumps because it's just so emotional for me. But they would call me and tell me that their loved one was doing something that he or she had not done in some cases in years, and they couldn't believe it. And the staff, even the staff where we ran the study at the center that had a lot of Alzheimer's patients, they were very skeptical. They were like, well, we really do drug research here. We don't think nutrition's going to do much. Even the staff had to admit, they would call me and say, I cannot believe what Mr. or Mrs. So and so is doing, because they would come there for the center, or many of those people were coming there to the center already just for like, socialization or different activities, but they could not believe what these people were doing. And the neuropsychologist, I have her recorded saying that in her 15 years of working at the center, every other study she worked on showed no benefit, and they were all drug studies. Our study was the only study where she could detect changes in literally every person who participated in our study. Even if the ADAS-Cog, which I'm now mentioning, is the measure that we use, which is the gold standard for assessing cognition in dementia studies. That was what showed the clinically and statistically significant improvements at 9 and 12 months. She said even if the test was not sensitive enough to show an improvement, she could tell that they were improving.
Wow.
So literally
That's
100%.
amazing. So 9 to 12 months, you said, right?
9 and 12 months,
Nice.
clinically and statistically significant
Wow.
improvement in cognition. And again, don't take my word for it. Go to PubMed, do your own research, try to find anything else, whether it's the 5 FDA approved drugs for dementia, another nutritional, hyperbaric oxygen, acupuncture, music therapy. It doesn't matter. Just, try to find anything else that tops our findings. It's not there. You won't find it.
Okay.
And so on the physical side, on the physiological side, we showed improvement in immune function according to the CD4 to CD8 ratio, which is very important for all of us, not just for people with Alzheimer's, but as we age, we want our helper cells to our cytotoxic cells ratio to be as high as possible. That's very important. So we showed that improvement. We showed a lowering of inflammation according to TNF alpha and VEGF, which have commonly been looked at mostly in cancer and heart disease. Our paper was probably the first one showing that change in people with Alzheimer's. And then finally, we showed just under a 300% improvement in adult stem cells according to CD14 cells. So when you put that whole picture together, you've got improvement in immune function, lowering of inflammation, an improvement or an increase in adult stem cell production that supports what happened clinically, because otherwise we didn't have imaging. We didn't have the funding to do imaging studies. And 15 years ago, I don't even know how good the technology for imaging the brain would have been to look at that type of morphology. But nonetheless, the only thing that made sense to us was as the immune system function, which improved, which was related to the increase in adult stem cell production, simultaneously with the lowering of inflammation, those stem cells migrated to the brain to help repair damage or create new neurons or new synapses, this whole concept of neuroplasticity, which wasn't really even accepted 20, 30 years ago. Now it's commonly accepted. We know that parts of the brain can be regenerated. The body can do that. But that was the only thing that made sense to us, that supported the clinical changes that we saw on the cognitive side. Otherwise, how do you explain that these people that were, previously not able to do anything, and then suddenly they start getting their recall ability and their memory and other parts of their cognitive function back? I mean, that's the only thing for us that made sense. So we got that first paper published, and I, at that point in my academic career, I mean, I was on cloud nine. I mean, again, this is going back about 10 years ago. And so I was very optimistic that what we had showed in our discoveries were going to be huge. We were going to really make something out of this. And I tried a couple of times with NIH. I tried a couple of times with the Alzheimer's Association to apply for more funding to get, to extend this line of research. And I got nothing. I got no response from people in those places. And so that was, for me, going from like cloud nine to, to the whatever the trough of the valley. I mean, it was very deflating and very discouraging, and really it really, the meaning or the message set in for me that NIH and these other institutions, really, if you're not doing pharmacology or genetics or both, when it comes to nutrition and dietary supplements, you're a black sheep. You're not part of the clique or part of what their goals are. And so that was pretty much the beginning of the end. It took me a few more years. I still was full time in academics for another 4 years, 3 or 4 years, but then that was pretty much the beginning of the end. But still, I felt like, while I was sort of deflated as an academician, I was very excited about going into the business world because I felt like being in business, I had the opportunity, or I had ultimately, eventually, a better opportunity to spread this message to people where otherwise they really had no hope. And so a lot of people, that have had these different types of neurodegenerative disorders have, tried daily brain care, used it. I mean, again, and I'm not talking about treating disease. I want to be very clear that that's not what I'm saying here. I don't want us to get any type of FTC or regulatory issues. But again, this is providing the raw materials the body needs to function properly. And then, if you want me to, I'll summarize the MS results as well. So, again,
Yeah.
MS being one of the three leading neurodegenerative disorders, maybe not quite as devastating as Alzheimer's and dementia, but still obviously a very tragic disease that creates a lot of dysfunction and impairment. And so we were running these two studies more or less simultaneously, and as we started getting feedback from that study, it was kind of the same thing, although there weren't as many caregivers involved. People with MS were mostly taking care of themselves. But at the end of the day, what we ultimately showed was, and one thing that I learned as I was running this study, was that people with MS typically don't die from MS, they die from infections. And so we went from, at baseline, on average, the subjects had 8 infections, to at the end of 12 months down to two and a half infections. So, like, a huge statistically significant change in the number of infections they were dealing with. So not only is this the leading mortality indicator for people with MS, but it also costs a lot of money for the medical system. So you have people with MS going in and out of the hospital or urgent care dealing with all these infections. It's very, very expensive to treat. So that was really exciting that we showed, this really huge reduction in inflammation. And then same, it was almost not identical, but a very similar pattern to what we showed in the Alzheimer's study, where we regulated immune function. We showed improvement in immune function. We lowered inflammation. And then all of the quality of life measures, again, cognition not being as primary of a focus as it is with dementia, it's more of, functionality and your mood and your quality of life. All those measures across the board were statistically significantly improved. And so the combination of the two, we published 2 papers from the MS study, 3 papers from the Alzheimer's study. We just got a 4th paper actually from the Alzheimer's study that was accepted by the Journal of Alzheimer's Disease for publication actually just 2 weeks ago. And so, even though academic publishing is still not really, it's not my primary motivator or focus at this point, but I'm still, as I mentioned, I'm still doing it as much as I can to support our business. But I mean, all of these, just the compilation, or the just the totality of all of these findings together, leading to the creation of daily brain care, for me was just, again, very exciting, and it helped me just have the confidence to leave academics and research behind to go into business. Now, being in business for the last 6 years hasn't been a bowl of cherries either, but
Never
nonetheless,
is. Never is.
I have very good science. The products help people, and I feel compelled to continue doing this for the rest of my life. So, you asked me to describe daily brain care. I can do that now, unless another, if there was another comment you had, or.
No, I mean, I understand in terms of being like in red tape and all that stuff with NIH and all of that. It's unfortunate because it's kind of like along the same line as being in healthcare, right? So it's a lot of red tape. It's a lot of money, I guess. It's just a lot of um, things that you hoops that you have to go through, and kind of correlating that. That's why I got into functional medicine, is because it's and that's how you probably got into business, is because you're taking things in a matter in your own hands. You're saying, I have a better, I can bring this to the mass versus going through all of this, the hoops and everything else. So I get that, definitely. But no, please do continue on what daily brain care is about, and if you could talk about maybe a protocol. Do you have a protocol?
Yes. Okay, I'd be happy to. Well, again, daily brain care is, it's a nutritional product. It's a dietary supplement, and it is based on, again, all that research that I just mentioned, primarily in Alzheimer's and MS. Although my colleagues, I mean, this is, I can't take credit for starting this. It's actually, I didn't mention the two people who got me into this whole polysaccharide area, one being Dr. Reg McDaniel, a pathologist by training out in the Dallas area. But Dr. McDaniel is a guy who just an amazing person I met almost 20 years ago. And he'd already been at it for about 20 or so years. And then when he and I met, he basically brought me up to the speed. I mean, I can tell you in my training, what I learned about polysaccharides was maybe one lecture in biochemistry, and it was pretty much just telling me that polysaccharides were an energy source. I had no clue all the other benefits that polysaccharides can give to our cells, primarily related to immune function and inflammation, but certainly lots of other mechanisms as well. But anyway, daily brain care is not only, again, if you twisted my arm and I would tell you that I think the allopolysaccharides are the most important feature of this particular formulation, just because of their uniqueness and the fact that most people have no clue, and certainly most people are not taking them. But the rest of the supportive ingredients, for example, the rice bran, again, having lots of different polysaccharides and other nutrients. The flaxseed is a very good source of omega-3 fatty acids, and of course lignans, which are, again, I don't want us to get into any kind of regulatory issues here, but the lignans in flaxseed, which have the highest concentration of, are incredibly anti-carcinogenic. So I'm not saying they treat cancer or that they cure cancer, but and we all actually have it. I mean, you mentioned something about prevention earlier that I didn't really speak too much on yet. To me, I think prevention is absolutely as important as, helping or rehabilitating someone when they have any type of health challenge. But as our cells go through our, this constant life and death process, we want our immune system to be functional and surveillant and just regulated enough to where when those cells are dying, that they don't end up becoming a problem later for us. And what I mean by that is, as a cell is dying, it has a chance to become mutated. And that mutated cell could end up becoming problems for us, or creating problems for us later, whether it's carcinogenesis or atherogenesis or, something else that could really end up killing us early in life. And so we want our immune system, we want our macrophage to be able to recognize those dying cells and make sure they're eaten and eliminated before they can cause problems. So going back to what I said about flaxseed having this high lignin content, is that's actually a very nice food to have, not just for the omega-3 content, but also to have this ability to help our immune system recognize when we should knock out these dying cells. IP6 is another. It's an interesting compound. It's not exactly a vitamin. It's not exactly a mineral. Let's just call it a phytonutrient. But it actually also comes from rice bran, and it's another one of these things that just helps our immune system to knock out things like carcinogenic or dying or mutating cells. So that's a really nice part of the formulation. It's got N-acetylcysteine in it, which prior to some of these companies more recently coming out with liposomal or micelle preparations or formulations with glutathione, previous to that, these companies that were selling oral glutathione, talk about selling snake oil. I mean, that basically was a snake oil, because you cannot really take oral glutathione without it being rapidly broken down by the stomach. And so N-acetylcysteine is one of the metabolic precursors to glutathione being our master antioxidant. So we put N-acetylcysteine in there to help boost our overall oxidant status and to be able to help counteract this constant pro-oxidation that we have, again, just through living. I mean, forget how you're eating or moving or not, or anything else you do to your life. Just sitting here and breathing, you're creating oxidation. So N-acetylcysteine is a big portion or a nice component to this formulation. Then we have in there things like tart cherry, which is just a nutritional powerhouse. I mean, it's loaded with all sorts of things. Tart cherry is a nice source of melatonin, for example. So lots of different nutrients and compounds that come from tart cherry. Dioscorea, which is a wild yam. It's got different types of compounds in it that actually help to regulate our endocrine system, which is responsible for secreting and creating all of our hormones. Citric acid, one of the primary components for the Krebs cycle that helps us generate energy, cellular energy. And then kind of I guess you could call it kind of like the secret weapon of daily brain care is this thing called ultra terra clay. It's a type of clay that is just a really, really cool little feature to this formulation. So even though we're not really touting it as like a detoxifier or a cleanser, what this clay does is that it actually helps to pull out and chelate. So all these heavy metals that we get exposed to, again, through just drinking water or breathing air or consuming our food, we get these heavy metals. We get things like arsenic, PCBs, PFAs, all this stuff, this junk that's floating around in the environment today. That stuff gets into us and then it gets into our fat, into our adipose tissue. And it's very, very difficult to pull that out. But what we know this clay does, this type of clay, is that it helps to chelate it out because those minerals have the exact opposite charge of the clay. And so the clay binds to those things and then it pulls them out. So whether we pee them out or poop them out, that clay is a really, really nice detoxifier. So while we're adding in all the other things with all the other ingredients, we are pulling out the
Taking
bad
out.
things with the clay. So it's a really nice addition. And we've seen that time and time again as part of what our protocol or our, well, protocol, I guess is the best word of helping people with this particular formulation. And so you put all those things together. And oh, by the way, it's if you're taking the powder, one dose is 2.5 grams. If you're taking the capsules, one dose is 2 grams. So in terms of like total macro content for the day, I mean it's a very little amount. Even if you were taking, I mean, I've had people with very active different types of diseases taking 6, 8, 10, 12 scoops of the powder per day, again, because they need a lot of support. But even still, compared to how many calories you consume through food, it's not a lot. So I've had the occasional, keto person who's big into their ketosis, big into not breaking fasting and things like that say, yeah, but wait a minute, it's 2.5 grams. I'm like, really? I mean, 2.5 grams? Like, come on, be serious here. We're not talking about a lot of macro content. But again, especially with the polysaccharides from the aloe and even to a second degree the rice bran, just a few hundred milligrams of this stuff per dose provides such amazing benefit. And I've seen this time and time again over now close to 20 years of working with this formula and going back to earlier versions of it. But and then you asked me about protocol, so that's very important as well. And I try to work with as many people as I can, in my business. Although hopefully at some point I outgrow this capacity, but currently as my business is, I try to get to know as many people as I can when they order daily brain care, and so I try to individualize it as much as possible, if for no other reason, just to help people try to be efficient with their money, because we all want to feel like, we're spending money the best way and we're not blowing it or burning it, and being loose with our money. And especially in our economy today, I know that's important for many people. But if you go strictly by what we did in the studies, so usually for most people, especially with anything very serious, I would say at least 4 scoops of the powder per day, and 4 scoops. I'm sorry, 1 scoop of the powder is roughly 4 capsules. It's not an exact correlation, but it's roughly the same. So if you do have something, very serious, again, dementia, cancer, some form of heart disease, diabetes, mood disorder, anything that's been chronic for systemic for many, many years, I say, do at least 4 scoops per day. Now, if you know that you have a very serious constitution, and, occasionally I deal with these people where they just take a little bit of something and then either maybe they get a loose stool or they get a headache or, some kind of like Herxheimer reaction or something like that. For those folks, I say just do like a half a scoop. or 1 scoop. Just do a very minimal amount and then do that for a week or two and allow your body to accommodate. Because to me, that Herxheimer reaction is actually showing that daily brain care is doing its job, but it's detoxifying so much, and then it makes the person uncomfortable. And so, then they think they're having a negative side effect. I'm like, no, this isn't anything negative at all. This is actually showing daily brain care is pulling junk out of you that your body wants to get rid of. But again, it causes you to have a headache, or, maybe you feel like you're pooping funny or something. And so it's uncomfortable. So dial that dose like way down and then just work yourself up. And I'm being a bit arbitrary when I say, 1 week or 2 weeks. There's really, each person's body has his or her own time. But
Right.
go slow and then increase in low amounts. And and if that's true, again, if that's for someone who's very sensitive, has a very sensitive constitution, then usually that will resolve it. The vast majority of people have no problem in taking either 2 scoops per day or 4 scoops per day. I personally take about four scoops per day. I'm past middle age, and I feel like I want to have that extra support. I work very hard. I feel like I have a significant amount of stress, and so I don't want to end up with any of these diseases of civilization or modern whatever you want to call it. I don't want to end up with any of that stuff. So for me, like, I think, like 2 scoops in the morning and 2 scoops in the evening are what I prefer to do. We made the capsules because sometimes people complain about the taste or the texture. And so for those people, obviously the capsules take that away. And then the same thing, I just tell them split your dose into a morning and evening routine. Actually, in the studies, we had subjects doing 4 doses per day. So the Alzheimer's people were doing 1 scoop with each of the 3 meals, and then a 4th scoop in the evening with a little bit of a snack before they went to bed. Now, some people get such a boost in energy that it keeps them awake. So for those people, I say, okay, well then, take your very first dose in the morning, and then in the early afternoon or late afternoon, early evening, then take your second dose. Don't wait till, toward the end of the evening. So for those folks, they want that energy throughout the day, and then not have any interference with sleep. But yeah, and I'm mostly giving you generalities here, but again, I like to individualize it as much as I can for people, because I feel like we all have certain genetic, biochemical exposure histories that are unique, and then depending on how much that may be, a significant concern, I just want to make sure that I can individualize it for as much as I can for people. But I would say, generally speaking, I would recommend, especially if it's anyone who's middle age or older and has some sort of an issue that needs addressing, I would say 4 scoops of the powder at least, which translates to, roughly 16 capsules per day. But I would do 2 in the morning and then 2 in the evening, and then go from there and see if you can find your sweet spot, right? Everybody needs a bit of trial and error.
Right.
Usually most people will show something in 90 days. And I have lumped people into roughly 3 broad categories as well in terms of response. So there's about 20% of people that I label super responders. Those people will start noticing things in like less than 2 weeks. Some of it even in a matter of like a day or two. They will like just immediately
Yeah.
start noticing changes. That's about 20% of people. Then you have another 50, 60%. The biggest number of people take somewhere between 30, maybe up to 60 days, but they'll notice the same kinds of things. And then that last 20 or so percent of people, they'll take about 90 days. And usually we say, if you haven't started noticing something in roughly 90 days, then you either need to take a bigger dose, or maybe we need to address some other nutritional or exposure issues to help daily brain care do its job. Even though maybe you don't feel changes on a conscious level, we know from the science, we know from what we've published, it's helping people. But maybe lowering inflammation or increasing stem cell production or increasing overall immune function doesn't necessarily always translate to something conscious that you feel, but nonetheless we know that it helps people. So it's just a matter at that point of if someone is convinced, if he or she wants to keep taking it, even if they can't really feel those effects. But I've been taking this stuff for over 10 years now. I've had my mother on it actually a little bit longer than that, probably going on 15 years. My wife's been on it for a couple of years. We have a 3.5-year-old daughter. We started her on it when she was 6 months old, when we started introducing her to solid food. I started putting her on it. She's now 3.5, healthy as a horse, hardly ever gets sick. But my point to that is, sometimes people say, well, what about for children, or can if I'm a pregnant woman, can I take it? And I say, look, this is from literally cradle to grave, like, and all of us in between. Our cells literally love these polysaccharides. And so we don't get them in the diet. And I don't care if you're vegan or keto or carnivore or Mediterranean or zone or, whatever your
Yeah.
dietary is, you're not getting these things in your food either. So that's why, again, it's so important to add this formulation or one of my competitors on top of the food you eat, because again, you will get such benefit from these polysaccharides. Otherwise, you're really missing out on what I think is one of the most significant tools in your toolbox.
Amazing. Thank you. Thank you so much for going all into detail. And yes, and it covered all the bases basically. Protocol, what was in it, who can have it. Literally it's for everybody. So that's amazing. That's it. You don't hear that too often, right? So it's always a nice thing to hear is a product that can go literally from cradle to grave. Um, so tell us, where can people actually get this, and how, where can people find you, get this product, and all of that good stuff?
I'd be happy to. So my best website is drlewisnutrition.com. That's dr no period Lewis Lewis nutrition.com. We have daily brain care there in both versions, both in the powdered and capsules. If people prefer Amazon, which I know, like, I think some crazy number, 25-30% of all retail purchases are now made on Amazon. You can get daily brain care there as well. We will have other products in the future that will have definitely, some polysaccharide component in them. But right now, we've been so focused on daily brain care for really two reasons. One, because of our research, we have the research that we've published, and I want our listeners to understand too, this wasn't Lewis going to PubMed and, coming up with some product to sell based on a bunch of other research out there. This is my baby. This has been my life for so many years now. And so this is based on our work, my colleagues and me. It's work that I'm so proud of. And again, to have the opportunity to help people in profound ways is what I'm doing here. So again, this is, I just can't impress enough on how important this is to me. But I have on our website, obviously not as much information on Amazon, but on drlewisnutrition.com, you can find, summaries of all the articles. We have a lot of videos there. We have testimonial videos. We have product reviews. I mean, there's a whole host of information. You can also find us under Dr. Lewis Nutrition on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. A little bit on TikTok. We haven't gone there too much yet, but most of those social media channels will, again, mostly have videos, a little bit of content, but really to go down like more to read things, you'd want to go to drlewisnutrition.com. That's your best source for finding not only daily brain care, but more information about me and my research as well.
And I will attest to that, because I'm gonna say I obviously went on that website and went down a rabbit hole, and there is so much information, and even in the frequently asked questions, it's something that I think needs to happen in terms of especially what you do, because you do a lot of research, but there's things on there that gives people knowledge about bioavailability. I think that's one thing that we all need to know as well, and that's the key in order what supplement is the best, is how it's bioavailable. And then you kind of go into detail of what it is and how, what to look for. So just in general, the whole website is full of knowledge, and it's like a novel. It's a great book to read. So I'll definitely, of course, put it in the show notes, and people can read on their own. But really appreciate you being on here, Dr. Lewis, and really going through helping. I didn't say this, but so I'm a product. I'm a daughter of, my mom had dementia. She did recently passed away, but not of dementia. And my dad had cancer and passed away from melanoma cancer. So I'm a product. Well, I shouldn't say product. I'm a daughter of two people who could have been helped by this product. So, it's something, of course, near and dear to my heart too. I'll definitely check it out for myself. I think we all need a little bit of help in terms of, in addition to our lifestyle or good nutrition, things that could definitely aid us into thriving and living a longer and healthier life. So thank you.
Amen to that. Thank you for having me, and I'd be happy to come back anytime, and I look forward to continuing our relationship.
Same here. Same here. Thank you so much for being on here. And to all my listeners, have a great one.